Good evening, cheeky natives. It's your favorite duo. And today I think it's a really exciting day. I can remember when I received the book, I was just like, I need to read it. So I called Alma and I was like, Alma, we need to read it. And so when the author agreed, who we'll introduce in a moment, to join us for a conversation, I was ecstatic. But I'll give Alma, the privileges of introducing our guest this evening and the book that we'll be talking about.
Thanks so much, Tlhogonolo, and welcome to everybody. We're so excited for another, I'm always tempted to say another episode, but this is not the podcast. So welcome to tonight's launch. I'm so excited. I'm going to read a short blurb just about the author and introduce our author tonight. So we have tonight Cin Fabré, who is a New Yorker born and raised in the South Bronx and Queens. At the age of 19, she joined a brokerage house on Wall Street, eventually becoming a high-earning broker at a top firm before leaving in search of a more meaningful life. Today, she divides her time between New York City and Europe and enjoys spending time with her wife and 4 children. Wolf Hustle, yes, is her first book. Welcome to the Cheeky Natives, Cin.
Hey, I love that cover. I got to tell you, because the US version is different and I love my US version cover. But when I saw this cover and the day that it came out in the UK and all its territories was the day the New York skyline actually mimicked the cover of my book, because we had those Canadian fires that had spread out to New York. And so it happened to be the skyline was orange. And that was the day my book came out. So I just was like, wow. That is New York wrapped up right there. So I was really excited. Yeah. Isn't excited about the air quality from my fellow New Yorkers, but it just was like kind of, hey, this is the way I'm coming into New York, with that cover. So I was really excited.
Yay. We love it, but we sort of collect books because we always want to have like the different versions. So stay tuned. We might just come through with the US cover as well.
Okay. You won't be disappointed.
It's really fascinating. When I saw the title of the book, I was thinking about, obviously, the famous Wolf of Wall Street. But I was quite curious about why the title Wolf Hustle ultimately was the one that you landed with. I think even our listeners and our viewers may want to have a little insight about Wolf Hustle. And then obviously the subtitle, A Black Woman on Wall Street. So are you able to tell us a little bit about the title, Wolf Hustle?
Yeah, of course. Initially the working title was A Black Woman on Wall Street, right? But I'm like, it's missing something. That's not all this book is about. It's not just about a Black person or a Black woman on Wall Street. It's about the hustle, and in my book, I mentioned hustle so many different times, not just myself, but my mom hustling, the people around me hustling. And then, I had to shine light on the wolves, right? We were wolves in this industry. And so to say, well, okay, I was part of that. So Wolf Hustle, but I'm also going to say I was a Black woman on Wall Street. And I feel like I covered my bases with that title. And it's going to be hard, coming up for my second book, another title that is as eye-catching as this one. But yeah, I'm proud of the title. And I think it's a great intro to what you're going to read in the book.
Speaking of which, I think it would be remiss of us not to just read a little bit from the introduction. So I'm going to ask if you have your book with you, if you can read just from the introduction. So just the first paragraph where you speak about the hustle has always been with me, because I think that is the whole setting for the book. If you don't have the book with you, I think Tlhogonolo and I will also be happy to go ahead and do the honor.
I mean, I know where the book is. I could go get it. But I don't mind you guys, reading it as well. Like, please go ahead, knock yourselves out.
Sure.
I want you guys to read
it. I guess I can do you one better, actually. I have the audiobook as well, and the audiobook is actually read by Cin. So let's just play a part of the introduction. Let's do it. Give me a moment.
A bay with a plan, yes.
I got you.
I like that. Okay.
Introduction.
Okay, let me just connect it to the speaker.
I'm going to listen to it too. I don't know that I've heard it, except when they're playing it back to you when you're first reading it.
Let's see.
This will be good
here
for
we go.
me.
The hustle has always been with me. Once I discovered the stock market, I became infected with the delirious joy that comes from a successful speculative trade, a short, an initial public offering, IPO, all the bells and whistles that have the power to get you dirty, filthy, abominably rich. And by the same token, the power to get you terribly, horribly, heart attack inducingly lose everything. That's when Wall Street became my hustle. There were drugs everywhere, cocaine and quaaludes, sex too, of course. But the drug I can still feel coursing through my veins to this day is the energy of the pit. It was palpable the second you walked into the building. The air itself was electrified with frenetic action and the thrill of making money, or at least the promise of it. The shrill cacophony of phones ringing and voices calling out. The booming laughter exploding at a crude joke. The tang of anxious sweat hanging under our noses. It all coursed through me, pushed me to work harder than I ever had in my whole life. It was intoxication and agony. I took in the dysfunction, tried not to let it decay who I was as a person. When you hear about the wolves in finance, you probably envision the Jordan Belforts of this world, and the tales of the crazy hours they worked, the antics they got into off Wall Street with their ties discarded and hair no longer neatly slicked back. Away from their significant others, out in the Hamptons on a hotel room, bottles upon bottles of Dom, mountains of snow, thousands of dollars thrown around carelessly, sometimes crumpled up or burned just because they could. It's all true. I was there and I witnessed it. I took part in some of it too. But
I think we'll stop there just to titillate people into getting both, actually, either reading the audiobook and actually getting the book. I must say that I read both of them simultaneously, and it was really wonderful to I felt like I was on Wall Street, like I was where you were, just because you were telling the story.
Yeah, I think, I wasn't even supposed to read the audio. We had tried to get a bunch of different actors to do it. And for some reason, and granted, I've never read a script before, no one could actually, as we get into the book, nail certain aspects of the book where they needed to come off rough and edge, and they needed to be able to, hit hard and just be able to bring it back. And so we went through rounds and rounds of these auditions. And then finally they were like, why don't you just do it? And I'm like, yeah, I guess I should, and I'm glad I did. You know what I mean? It's funny because you get better as you get into the chapters, you get more comfortable. I was doing it in Paris, and, they don't have this thing with AC. So I was sweating and drinking 5 liters of water a day. And I'm like, these conditions are not the best, so we need to do something else here. So we, but once you're reading your own book, you do get excited, so I was really excited that I did it. I'm so glad it worked out that I did. And I can't wait to see what's next, when the film comes out.
Speaking of what's next, that's actually what I was thinking about was the fact that Apple's won the rights to adapt this book into a film, and there was a multiple studio bidding war, which is always exciting. And I guess the question is, the transition from book to film is always a little bit difficult, and people always have sort of deep feelings about the book being better than the film, etc., etc. Those comparisons always exist. But for you, I want to know how or what it meant to have multiple studios bidding for this story, which is such a powerful, which Jacqueline Whitson called a clear-eyed and powerful story that everybody needs to read. So I'm guessing, what does it mean for you to see the story go as far as it has?
I got to tell you, when I wrote that book, I had no doubt I would sell it as a movie one day. I wrote it cinematically. There's different areas of the book that you can just pick on and say, that would be a great scene in a movie. And because that, to me, felt everything that I did was leading up to something that could be told on the big screen one day. This was a great story. It was a powerful story. It's inspiring. But I also wanted to share with people that whatever it is that you want to do, you can figure out and get it done. My passion shines through in that book. And I wanted for everyone to feel like they have an opportunity, as I did 25 years ago, and to know that this is now, and I had these studios and, the different actors and producers, and, I've interviewed with so many of them during the course of a month's time. And Apple would have come in, and Apple doesn't pick a lot of projects. They only buy a few projects a year. They don't have this extensive library like the Netflixes and the Amazons. But when they do make something, they make something special. And they knew when they saw and read this book that this was going to be something special, right? And for me to be able to work with Apple and know that they're going to do my story right. I'm also executive producer on this movie, as well as in consultant. I felt really, really confident that there was not going to be something in that movie that I actually didn't agree with, or I felt, that I was totally against. They want to make sure that they get this done right. And for me to be part of this, process has been absolute blessing.
And I mean, I think what's also exciting is the fact that a Black woman who's produced the likes of Teal and is going to be also the director of this movie, and I think that's really exciting. I want us all to get into the book. One of the kind of major themes, one of the things that I resonated with, I mean, people talk about this all the time. They're like, oh my gosh, representation is important, representation is important. But I keep thinking about like, Wolf Hustle is like kind of the first moment when I was like, yes, someone actually is showing us what it means when we talk about representation being important, right? And when you said cinematically it looks good, I'm thinking about this scene with this Black woman at this at the mall. You're just a young woman who's finished high school, trying to earn a living, and we know the context of you having heard about kind of stockbroking from a classmate and now meeting this woman. I wanted to talk a little bit about that, right? About the actual power of representation and what that moment and that experience was for you.
When I was in it, and I think what is something that when I talk about now is when people are like, well, were you intimidated? Were you scared? You were this Black person and you were a woman. If you look at Wall Street right now, it's been 25 years since I've been on it. Nothing's pretty much has changed. It's still an old boys white club, right? But, what I feel is that when I wanted to do something, it didn't matter to me what sex or, gender or race or whatever it was being represented. It was something I wanted to do and no one was going to stop me. And to walk into that boardroom to deal with that many men on a daily basis, I always thought about, they don't know what I'm about. I know what they're about. I've seen their story a million times. They've never seen mine and they've never heard me. So there was nothing that I felt that was going to be something that I couldn't do that they were doing. And so I never had this fear of, oh my God, can I do this? I'm surrounded by, just men. I'm surrounded by white men. There's the only people of color, the people on the other side. And I was just like, well, I'll be the first to get over. And that was it.
I love that you've spoken about being the first to get over, because we often think of like representation and first, but not think about the heavy weight that carries. Particularly when you think about the differences in culture, where Black people and Black women are expected to assimilate into these environments where nobody else feels like they have to. And I think of the scene in the book, without giving too much away, because we still want people to buy the book. But there is a scene around food in the book, right? And the clash of cultures and like the ways in which people with privilege get to navigate the world is so, so jarring. So I think about how people would waste food in the book, and you think about people who are food insecure. And reflecting back on that particular moment, I'm curious about what some of your thoughts are, having lived it and then written it and had to relive it, and what it meant to be first in time, but also in a culture like that is so particularly violent and refuses to take into account the diversity of the environment around it.
Yeah, I mean, what I saw in front of me, and I was 19 years old, right? I had never experienced anything like that. I'd never seen, people spending thousands of dollars, on just things that they really didn't care about. That's not the way I grew up. I grew up to turn off the lights, to not waste paper towels, to make sure I ate everything on my plate, where one dinner was dinner for all. There weren't 5 different choices, and so to see that and see the privilege that people have, I didn't even equate it to, whether it was a Black or a white thing. What I just felt like, these people just didn't appreciate what they had, and I would never do that. That's not the way I was raised. And so it made me want to get over there even more, so to show them that, no, that's not what you do. This is what you do. And that determination for me is everything, because once you have something that you really want to go for, you don't think about the obstacles in front of you. You think about what's going to happen at the finish line.
Speaking about determination, because I think that's a theme that runs throughout the book, right? There's a particular scene that I feel like is a turning moment in the book, and I think reading it and wondering what your reflections are would be interesting for me. So there's a scene in the book where you pitch, so everybody's like afraid and you sort of
that moment, yeah.
I think that's what I can't wait. Like people do cameos. I hope that in the movie you'll do the cameo of just that particular scene, because it's going to be so good.
Well, thanks for the idea.
It's powerful because it feels like a moment of reclamation, right? So we see a particular personality that gets you through Patterson, etc. Then you get to this place, and in the ways that I think some violent spaces also require of us, you shrink and you become very different to how we know you to be. And there's a particular turnaround that takes place there. And I think it would be interesting to know what your reflections are on that now, looking back. Like, do you now look back and think, this is who I've always been, and that moment was a reclamation of space and of time? Or do you feel like that moment is who you became or know yourself to have become? Because it's really interesting to know what you would think of that particular book. It's pivotal in the book.
Yeah, when I think about going back then, and I'm so glad that I remembered, because that was a turning point in the way I moved forward going, after doing that scene that we guys, we're talking about right now. And I think part of me has always been someone that is a plotter. I plot, I build relationships, I had done everything they had asked me to that point, and I wasn't getting what I was promised. And for me, I had to show, this is what the beast that you have trained. Okay. So this is who I am. This is what you will get. You will have privy to if you give me a chance. And I needed in that moment to just do something different, because what I was doing and what everybody else was doing was not changing the game for any of us. And so someone had to do it. And so I had to be, in my own mind, if I don't do it, no one else will. And so I'm so glad that moment happened. And even talking to a friend of mine years later, he goes, Cin, I will never forget the day you got up and your chair fell back and you pitched the owner of the company. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, he was like, that was just like so powerful for me. And I said, if Cin can do it, I can do it too. And so that to me is something, that affirms like, hey, sometimes people are just kind of waiting in the wings, and just saying, hey, once she does it, I can do it. Once they do it, I can do it. Once he does it, I can do it. And so, yeah, I happened to be the person that day. And I'm just so proud that we can have a conversation about it, because I think it's really important for everyone to remember, if there's something you want, you have to go get it.
I particularly also liked the, the follow-up scene where you were like, yeah, I'm a pussy, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think there was something powerful about that, right? The as you're saying, wanting to distinguish yourself, to remind people that, like, actually, I'm a woman.
Yeah.
You may think like I'm hustling and we're all wolves in Wall Street, but I'm different, right? And I want that difference to be known. And I wondered about your reflections, because you speak a lot about in the book how you kind of had to assimilate in many ways into the culture in order to get what you wanted. But also
sure.
in little bits, I think what you also did quite powerfully is to claim space for yourself and remind people that yes, I'm a woman. But I also like the fact that, like, you claimed what womanhood looked like to you, because you think about when you moved on and there was a dress code, you were like, I ain't gonna do none of that. So I wanted to speak a little bit about that kind of activism to moving away and distinguishing yourself as defining your own womanhood and what it looked like on Wall Street.
I think once you're part of that culture, and you just happen to pick up some of the same mannerisms, I talk about, even becoming a misogynist to some degree because I'm in this space which just men. We weren't even allowed to call women. Women weren't taken seriously, and so you start to get that. You're like, okay, this is, and I'm like, no, wait, I'm a woman. I am here to represent, and so I remember the day he called us pussies. He's like, what do you guys want to be, a bunch of pussies? And I'm like, I am a pussy. Yes. And I remember him looking at me. He's like, yeah, you are. Okay. Everybody just looked at me like, oh, thanks for the reminder, and I'm like, yeah, remember, who's in the room as well. And so I think what's important for me is to always, no matter how you identify, is to be able to identify and let people know this is the way I identify. You know what I mean? And just say, I am not necessarily like you. I am different. I am in my own space. I'm running my own course. Have respect. You know what I mean? So I think always I will be that person. You know what I mean? However I choose to identify. But I think it's really important for anyone that is feeling like they're less than, or they feel like they're the minority, to figure out how you could become the majority by yourself and feel good with that.
So I think relationships are an important part of the book, but there's like some relationships that I think that it would be really good to just reflect on. And I'm always struck by the relationship between you and your mother in the book. I think that there's a tenderness that you speak of, and I think that there's a navigation that you do with the relationship that only comes towards the end of the book, right? So
right.
in a way, there's a way that we grow with our parents, and often we don't get to reflect until much later on. And I think it's also important that, for example, the dedication right in the beginning of the book is to your mother. And I found that so striking in thinking about the relationship as you write it. I am always fascinated by relationships between mothers and daughters, because we're almost taught that this is supposed to be a very natural, easy, best friend relationship. But often that's not the case. And I wanted to know why it was so important for you to make sure that you wrote about the relationship with your mother in all its honesty, with the tenderness, the vulnerability, but also the honesty, especially where there were difficulties.
Because relationships are whatever that comes with it, as far as how you express yourself in that relationship. And it could be love, it could be disappointment, it could be hurt, it could be anger, it could be sadness. It could, for my relationship, my mother was never an easy one. It just wasn't, and I think as I got older, I got to appreciate her more and more. And I always respected her. That's why I wrote, you thought I wasn't listening, but I was always listening. I respected my mom. And when she said you could do anything you want, I believed her, because I knew the kind of woman she was. And I knew the person she was, and whatever her trauma was in the past had kind of had this barrier with us. Well, especially with me. Where she wanted the best for us, but she didn't know how to express love. It wasn't easy for her, but she expressed love to me when I think about it, like sending me to private school, always championing me, telling me whatever it is in life you want, you can get, and so I wanted to kind of pay homage to her, to say, listen, it wasn't always the best relationship in a lot of ways. And we go through that with different people that we love, and it's always the people that you love that hurt you. But I also wanted to say I learned so much from her, and I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for her. So I can accept the things that came with that relationship, because for me, it made me who I am. And so I'm proud to have her as my mom.
I think that's so powerful, right? To think about, like, often we want to portray our parents in glowing ways, right? But sometimes to say they were flawed, they were human, but they were also good, and they tried their best with what they had. Speaking about relationships, I think another very interesting, but also like one of probably the best relationships that came from this book. It's kind of the sisterhood that was between Catalina, Kenya, and yourself, right?
Yeah.
I think often about chosen family, and I'm like, well, I mean, it was the 90s. It wasn't necessarily chosen family. We didn't have the language for it. But really, these people became your family. And Catalina was there when you lost your mom, you know, and I wanted to just speak about like the beauty of this friendship, because in many ways, Catalina was also your biggest cheerleader. But you were there for each other. And Kenya like was just like the baby sister who was there as well. So I wanted to speak a little bit about that and reflections about kind of how you feel that relationships also helped you while you were navigating kind of this male-dominated world on Wall Street.
I want to say, like, for my friendship with Catalina and Kenya, they were the first people that I fell in love with. You know, I never knew what that meant to like love people where you would do anything for and they would do anything for you. They always loved in my home. I never felt that love come through the way they expressed love. And to have that relationship, you know, 30 some odd years later, where, you know, I'm still like, hey, make sure your mom saves me something. Or, you know, I even text her the other day, and I speak to them at least twice a week. You know, I'm mailing something to your house, make sure I get it. Like, you know, like nothing's changed. You know, when I see my own kids in that same basement, I have 4 kids and playing with their kids and her mom's still yelling, like nothing has changed. It's like, I always still feel like I'm 13 when I go to her basement because her mom's like, you know, just yelling at me if I did something wrong. So, it's a beautiful thing to have. It's something that I will cherish forever. I hope most people one day get that type of friendship and that type of love and that sisterhood, because I always wanted a sister. It's funny because I was, you know, I would dream of having a sister, and I was in my 20s. I was like, oh, I wish my mom had given me a little sister. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I already have my sisters. You know what I mean? Like they're there already. I got 2. So I've been blessed in so many ways. I think when people reading my story, they can resonate with something there. There's something for everyone. You know what I mean? Whether it's dealing with, you know, the type of household I grew in. I talk about HIV. We talk about cancer. We talk about wanting things in life, being poor, finding success, you know, being in a male-dominated industry, having these toxic relationships, dealing with racism or sexism, whatever it is. There's something for everyone. But I think the overall theme is to say that don't let any of that distract you, right? Because once you're distracted, then the people are going to be able to still continue and you haven't. So just keep going, you know? And for me, sometimes you need to have that support of sisterhood or whatever that hood is. You know, I talk about my friend Jose. He's been my best friend for 30 years. Actually, he's flying in for my birthday, you know? So he's also my best friend. So whether it's a man, and he's a white male, so that's okay too. You know what I mean? So friendship can come in any form. You know, so just appreciate when you do have it, and just, you know, try to give that same respect that you want in return.
I think speaking just around the distractions, I was struck so much by some reflections around failure. As I think that we operate in a world that's very obsessed with success and what success looks like, but also I think social media has sort of made it very easy to think about success in ways that make failure seem like it's life-changing and it would end your life, you know? And I think that in many ways this book is also a reflection on what it looks like to fail forward, and to fail but to succeed. And I wonder what some of the reflections on the ways that you chose to write about in the book, what that meant for you, and what I guess your relationship with failure is now, because we know what the relationship with success looks like, but what does your relationship with failure look like now?
I got to tell you, you know, I'm one of those people that I don't take a lot seriously. You know, I love to laugh. Like my favorite thing is watching comedians. You know, I'm going to see, you know, Dave Chappelle in a couple of weeks. I love, you have to be able to laugh at yourself. You have to be able to, you know, I talk about saying I have a flat ass. You know, I didn't shy away from it. You know, I was just like, yeah, I don't have the biggest butt. That's okay.
I mean, your mom said that, right? She was just
But she
like,
was right, you know what I mean? So I was okay with that, and I wasn't mad about it. I was just like, okay, so if I try something and it doesn't work out, I don't know that I look at it as failure. I look at it as it didn't work out, you know. And a lot of times, if something doesn't work, I always look at it, it's their loss, it's not mine, you know. So that's one of the things that I've, you know, and maybe people will call it egotistical or arrogant. For me, it's just what I do. That's how I protect my mental health. I can't get so deep in the trenches like, wow, this did not work out, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to be stuck here wondering why. I'm more like, okay, didn't work out. Whatever I learned, all right, I'm ready for the next thing. So I think we all take what we call losses here and there, but sometimes you got to take a loss to have a win, and that's okay. You know? So I'm good with that. I really mean that when I say I'm good with whatever people consider failure or loss. I just know I tried.
I think one of like kind of the boss ass things like you did while you were in Wall Street, but you tell us is you got on a flight, right, to Manchester. For me, like when I was reading that part, I was like, wait, what? Like you just booked a flight, packed your bag, and went to the airport and
And
went
did well. And did well. Not just went to Manchester, but did well, because that's a boss move, right?
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about that particular moment, right, in your career that like you, as Alma said, there were a couple of losses. The kind of brokerage firm that you worked for, we discovered that they were just, they were dodgy, and you, one of the people who worked there was said, listen, we want you over here, but you got to move quickly, and you moved quickly. And I wanted to just speak about like kind of the privilege to be able to book a flight on the day that you fly out and to meet the boss of Manchester.
Passport that day too.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And God.
And I got my passport that day. Yeah.
I wanted to speak about that.
Yeah. I was like, listen, these guys are not going to outsmart me. I didn't work this hard. I didn't care that I didn't have the same information they had. I always just thought that if I show up and I have a conversation with someone, it'll be good. And so, you know, within hours, I made that decision. I'm going to get on a flight. Remember, it was British Airways flight, and got my passport same day. I hadn't had a passport in years. I'm sure I remember going to Haiti, so I had one. And so that whole process was like, hey, I got to do it. I got to move. I'm not even going to think about it. I remember when I get to the airport, the woman was like, you're not dressed up. And I'm like, what does that mean? I'm wearing clothes. You know what I mean? I knew I was in designer gear, so I had no idea what she was talking about. She was like, well, your arms are showing. And I was just so perplexed with that. I'm like, is this a rule? Like if you're going to Europe, you can't have your arms out? I didn't even know. But what it was they were booking me into club class because I'd gotten there so late. That's all they had available. So she had wished that I dressed up a little bit, whatever that meant for her. And I was just like, well, all right, I'm going first class, you know? And yeah, just, you know, having that conversation and meeting, you know, the owner of a football team. I was like, I need more money. He's like, what? Like, you need more money? And I'm like, yeah, I need more money. Like, I don't even think that they understood that I wasn't there to have a conversation and say, well, I'm so sorry you're losing. I'm there to ask for more money, you know? And I also went to a football match that day. So it was a great thing that I did. I appreciated it. And then to run into one of the brokers on the plane on my way back was just like, wow, okay. He was there trying to take my client. So that whole thing was a whirlwind. I appreciate everything that I've gotten from it. I would do it again. I would do this whole thing again. For anybody that ever thought to have that question, you know, it was an experience that is the gift that keeps on giving, right? I'm able to write about it and hopefully inspire people and just have conversations about going around mental health and being young, and just remembering that even if you're putting your head down, you have to remember when to pick it up. So, yeah.
I think that reinvention or reinventing yourself at different parts of the book is like a theme, right? So we see you shed particular layers, we see you become more of a certain thing, become less, and there's a goodbye that you do at the end of the book, right? And there's a goodbye, and you do, and you leave, and you have to then reinvent yourself and do the next thing. And I guess the question is, what surprised you most about writing this book? and then having to move on to the next part of your life. So you say goodbye to the wolf hustle and you now must become something else that you've not tied your identity to. So I'm really curious about that. What does it mean to constantly have to reinvent yourself in different spaces? And what's been the most difficult part of saying goodbye to that identity?
I think for me, I didn't even know I was reinventing myself. Someone I spoke to maybe about 15 years ago was like, I admire the fact that every few years that you're willing to try something and do something different. And I'm like, she was like, you reinvent yourself. I'd never heard anyone say that to me. And I never thought of it as something that I was redoing, because I guess I feel like reinventing is, starting from scratch. You're re-going about something a totally different way. But for me, the part of me that I write that book has never left. That person is still there. I'm still Cin. I'm still hustling. I'm still grinding. I'm still trying to figure out how I can do something different. I may just do it in a different space, but I've always feel like I've had success, and whether they're small and whatever it is, it could be as simple as saying, I beat that parking ticket, is because that mentality of wanting to win has never left. It just shows up differently depending on the season. And so for me, I'm happy to always, in 5 years, I don't know what I'll be doing. I could be doing something totally different. You know what I mean? I don't know. And that's the great thing about always willing to go up, put yourself out there and trying something different, because you don't know where it's going to lead you. And if I'm sitting in the same space constantly, I don't get that experience of trying and knowing what can lead me somewhere else. So I'm always happy to go out there and go against the grain. I really am.
I mean, kind of the beginning parts of the book is you contextualizing your history, your family, where you come from, but also you speak about growing up in the Bronx and in the projects. But then there is a move, your mom, I sat there, I was like, your mom is a hustler. She was like, let's leave in the middle of the night. No one's got to know where we got to go. And she had bought a house, right? But I was thinking particularly about like Black people, but more particularly about Black women and perhaps Black, queer, and trans folk, where like sometimes there is this, we operate a lot in survival mode, right? And kind of the things that we do is connected to that survival mode. And we just like, and now there's a move for us to maintain a little bit of rest, right? To not constantly be showing up in the ways that we are supposed to be showing up. But I wanted to speak a little bit about kind of, for me, I felt like the actual moving of bureaus in many ways was also a shifting in the way that both your mom and you operated. Like the Bronx was a particular moment, but moving to Queens also shared a different thing. And I wanted to speak a little bit about that, kind of like the spatial transformation in many ways and changing the survival hustle mode.
The way we left in the middle of the night, my mom was gangster. Like, I don't know many people that do something like that. And I didn't even get to say goodbye to anyone. My mom's like, we're going to do something, we're doing it. And that's it. And it was like, all right, just give me my bag, And so waking up that next morning, was so different. There was no, the police sirens, the ambulances, the screaming, the music blaring. It was just quiet. It's almost like I woke up in some wonderland, and then to see how I was so Bronxish, compared to these people that were Queens people, it was a huge shift. It was a total different dynamic of the way I needed to speak and the way I needed to talk, because they didn't even understand me. I was, a Bronx girl, and I still speak like I'm from the Bronx, So I think that was really, really eye-opening to me to see how different people lived, and the fact that my mom could just feel like we would integrate and be fine. She didn't even find me a school. She was like, go find your own school. It's like, all right, like, that's who she is. Like, you'll figure it out. Like, and I did figure it out. I found a school and I found my sisters in the process, and that's all about not saying, okay, mom, can you please hold my hand and do this with me? This is my mom saying, I'm going to throw you out. It doesn't matter what the sea is, if it's roaring or if it's calm, you need to go out there and figure out how to swim. And having that type of mentor in an own way, right, besides being my mom, was so instrumental on how I navigated life. I always was like, if I can't depend on other people, I need to figure it out on my own. So yeah, that was a huge culture shock for me to make that shift. Totally unexpected. I think you're frozen.
Alma might be frozen, yes.
Yeah.
Or I'm muted. Alma, can you just unmute yourself?
Yeah, she's definitely frozen. So
okay. Oh, she's back. Hey, Alma.
I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you.
Shout out to the undersea cables that are going through it all at the moment. So I was saying the moving in the night it must just be like a Black people thing, because even on the continents, people will tell you, just moved in the middle of the night. My mom didn't want us to tell anyone where we were going. We left. Our neighbors don't know where we are. And a friend in Kenya also said the same thing. And I read that and I found it so interesting. I was like, okay, this is a real. It's an interesting way to navigate. But I guess what struck me a lot was how you found out that you were diagnosed with ADD much later in the book, right? And I think about how often Black girls particularly are misdiagnosed. So there's underlying ADHD and Black girls don't get diagnosed. And I think about what that means for our academic experience, what it means for how we navigate the world moving forward, particularly in communities that aren't typically forgiving of different or of people who don't move in particular ways. And I guess what I'm curious about what that getting that diagnosis meant for you and how it's just changed how you navigate certain things now in your life. Has it felt like a validation to know that like there was something that you suffered from that you needed help with that you didn't get? Or did you just find it absolutely infuriating that so many people who look like you are still experiencing the same thing in 2023?
For me, the way my brain works, I'm leaving it as it is. It's done me good so far. I would not suggest that for everyone because it could be your downfall. And in certain ways, there were a lot of things that were not addressed because my brain is like moving on to the next thing so quickly. And that could reflect in your personal life as well, right? Because you're so quick to move on and you have this mechanism of how you deal with things. And so to know that there are so many people that are walking around without being diagnosed, or they know that they're there, but they're not there. And there was no name to it then, you know what I mean? People will just chalk it up to whatever it is they feel comfortable with. I think for me, it's been something that has worked for me in the sense that I've learned now that this is what I'm doing and how do I need to get there, and how do I get there without getting distracted? And so I think that's really important. Even the way I wrote this book, I focused on it for a few months and knocked it right out because I knew any other way it would take me 5 years. I'm like, oh, there's a rainbow. Okay. So it did not, anything could distract me at any point, and that still happens. It takes a lot for me to just sit here and focus and have a conversation. But if I'm engaged, I'm in a better place. So yeah, I'm excited that, there are going to be a lot more people when they're reading the story that they'll be able to see parallels in their own lives and be able to say, okay, you know what, I need to take control. And how do I go about doing that? And sometimes it's just seeking some help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's no shame in mental health care. There's no shame in talking about where you come from. I think for me, it was actually really liberating. I've never had to feel like I felt bad about anything. It's not about sometimes, where you start. And sometimes how you start is how you end up finishing. And for me, I took what I had from my childhood and used that in a positive way to be able to cross that finish line and feel like I accomplished something.
I really like that, and I think it's really important for us to speak about mental health because we think about your older brother who also passed away shortly after your mom passed, and just the way in which, you know, Black people have been demonized and not taken care of, and like how life could have been different if we, you know, we were thinking about mental health and being open about mental health, right? There are moments in the book where you speak about, you know, the signs were there, right? Like, but what did we know? Like, nobody was openly going to
Right.
speak about depression, for instance, and kind of like, you know, the relationship between, as you say, you know, upon your brother's death, you say, you know, him and your mom are together like they were even on earth, right? Like the idea of that. And I think for me, what was really painful was him saying, you know, if mom dies, like I'm out too, right? And for that to be a reality was really deep for me. But for, I think again, it was a spotlight on like, these are things that we don't want to talk about, but if we speak about them, they might actually save someone's life.
Yeah, for sure. I think not understanding it at that age, I was, in my teens when we first started to see the signs. And my mom just didn't have that information. We didn't have the resources. Lacking the resources is also a big part of it to, Black and brown communities. When you don't have that access and you're not informed, you're making decisions really out of the blind. And for my mom, it was more of a shameful thing. She didn't necessarily want to say, there's something going on with my son. She didn't even share that with me. She just said, oh, your brother's not, he'll be fine. He's depressed. And so I had that attitude with him. I'm like, hey, don't be lazy. Come on, let's figure it out. You're good. I'm doing good. Like, I didn't understand what he was going through. Right. And even after his death, I didn't understand. It took a long time for me to kind of resonate, to understand that he had always had problems. And I didn't know enough how to help him. I got him a therapist one time. I just thought he was in the dumps. But yeah, mental health right now, I always talk about it like, hey, if you feel that you need help, don't be ashamed, get it. Don't be afraid to ask. Speak to someone. Someone will be able to point you in the direction to get you the help that you need.
I
I
don't
think
know if
it's
Salma is frozen. Oh, you're back.
is an interesting sort of concept for me. And I think in writing our stories, we write against the shame. And shame is this place, or shame goes to die when we tell our stories. I think Brene Brown said this. And I'm wondering, so you're talking about a second book, but with this book, how would you categorize this book? What were you hoping to do in writing your story, right? This is also a very personal book, but I think that there are particular things that you spotlighted on. So what were you hoping to do with the book in writing it? And I guess in the future, what would you hope that this book does?
I have a 20-year-old daughter, and I think about her. This is the time in my life, back then where I became licensed on Wall Street. And I would never want her to experience what I experienced, though I would do it again for different reasons. To know that you have these kids that you want to protect, or people that you want to protect, and at the same time, that they're being influenced by social media. That's, when I was in the business, I didn't have social media. I didn't have a Me Too. We didn't have, anything that was protecting us, or at least I felt protecting me, right? And I had to just do that on my own. I had to figure out how to protect myself. And I think that I didn't have the influence of someone telling me all day, besides in person, but where they're talking about me on whatever it is, a podcast or on a social media chat or a meme, influencing me. I was able to influence myself. I was able to be that person that said I wanted to do something, and all the noise was never going to, be a part of how my life shaped up. And to know that my teenagers are to this very day are affected by what is being said, that could be said, that is being said, is how they go forward and navigate, is really something that worries me, because I'm like, listen, this is what I did. That's part of why I wrote the story. I want you to understand how I figured it out, how I didn't care what anybody else thought. Granted, we're in a different time, but I wanted to show sometimes you just need to just learn a skill. It's okay. You don't have to be virally famous to be validated. You know what I mean? And so part of my story is to inspire people. I wanted people to to show people what I was able to do without the technology and the resources that we have today. Okay, that was really important to me. To inspire women, to inspire people of color, Black women, to show we are valuable. You know what I mean? And I show what my value is, even as we speak today. And also to just also understand so many different things will come at you in life, and you just have to figure out how you're going to deal with it, right? Because that's going to affect how you go forward in anything that you do. And I, at the end of the day, hope to inspire people. I really want people to just take the bulls by the horn and be like, yo, you know what? That girl could do it. I could do it. You know what I mean? Like, have that attitude. I want anyone to say that. I'm happy. If you got that by reading this, I've done my job. I literally have done my job.
Yeah.
That makes me happy.
And are you working on a second book? We like exclusives on Cheeky Native, so we want to have a little in if there's something more. So we ready ourselves to bring you back to talk about anything else.
I'm definitely working on the second book. So that's pretty much done. I'm just editing it right now. It's a total pivot from the first book. Nothing about Wall Street, but it does go into how I took my Wall Street ways into my second part of life, and how I was able to start kind of a new hustle. And so I think it's equally as exciting. It's different. It involves more of, I guess, kind of the human more side of Cin, and how I show my vulnerabilities, and how I'm able to kind of say, wow, I get kicked in the gut a couple times, but I figure out how to get back. So I think it's going to be a great story. Again, it's a different story, and I'm excited for that, to share that also with the world.
I'm so glad you said that, because Alma and I, when we were talking about the book, we're like, but where is Cin? Like, I know this is Wall Street, but like, I don't know. What is Cin like? Like, so I'm glad we'll get a book where there is a little bit more personal, more vulnerable, because you are right. You said this book needed to do a particular thing. So I'm glad, I'm glad for this conversation, because now I'm looking forward to getting the moments of the interior life of Cin, right? Because I'm interested. This book, Wolf Hustle, has interested me. I want to know more.
Yeah, I kind of wrote the second book right after I wrote the first, and I sat on it for a couple of years. And so when Wolf Hustle came out, because you know how publishing takes forever, I'm like, okay, now it's time to start editing and going over and inserting. And, even from 2-3 years ago, whenever Shirley wrote it, I want to change things. I have different perspectives. I'm evolving, right? But the great thing is, when I'm writing the book, I'm writing it in the age that I am. So all those ignorances and all those things that might piss people off, I'm just sharing to you the way I thought, then. And I love that part of it, because I can say and kind of, just be real and keep it honest, and know that people are going to get annoyed. And some people are like, oh, I understand that, but just understand that if I'm being transparent, I have to write what I am thinking and doing at the time. So that's the only way I know how to write.
What was the most difficult part of writing Wolf Hustle? We're asking you to go back. You had to recollect, remember some really difficult times. I mean, there were scenes in the book where I was just absolutely enraged, particularly when you're at VTR. But I'm curious about, what was the most difficult part of writing Wolf Hustle, and what did you learn from that particular recollection?
I actually had a great time writing it. To me, when I was a cold caller, I would laugh and hang up and, yell slurs out, whatever it was in that moment. I got my anger out when I hung up the phone. I never took it with me. I never took it home with me. And so for me, it was a great time. So writing it and touching base with all these, characters that I've spoken to in 20 some odd years, and connecting with them, and I write that in my author's notes. I felt like I was back in the pit all over again, to recall those scenes, to say, hey, Mr. Jones, it's Cin Fabré over at VTR Capital. How are you? Yeah, I'd love to send this out to you. Can I get this out to ABC Street? Whatever. all of that has never left me. So being able to write it, it just really seemed like it was just a couple of days ago I was in the business. So for me, it's a timeless story, because what's amazing is that the very same things I talk about, even the certain ignorances and the nuances that I write about in the book, are still going on today. So there are some things that have never changed, you know what I mean? So people can relate to the story. And having all of that happen to me, guess what? I'm the one that's walking out with an Apple deal. You know, I'm not mad at anybody at that firm. You know what I mean? I thank them. Thank you for giving me that space and the platform and, you know, the energy to just write that story. And I wrote it with such zealous, because I'm like, I know what's going to happen at the end of the day. I know how I'm going to make this work again for me. That's why I said it's the gift that keeps on giving. So I'm good. No hard feelings.
No hard feelings. Cin, this has absolutely been a wonderful conversation. And I think Wolf Hustle, A Black Woman on Wall Street, is really, as Jacqueline says, what a clear-eyed and powerful story. Everyone needs to read it. Like the Cheekinators are also saying everyone needs to read it. But because we love you, we also have it available on the Cheeky Merchant. So you can just go on www.co.za/shop and just get yourself Wolf Hustle, and we will get it right to your doorstep, because you know what? We love readers. We love readers who support writers. And so, Cin, to say thank you very much, one, for writing Wolf Hustle, but also thank you for, you know, having time to share your reflections with us. It's absolutely a really wonderful book, and we personally look forward to reading the second book.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for the support, and thank you for the people out there listening today. And I hope you enjoy the story, and I look forward to what we do in the next go round.
All right, Cheeky Natives. Until next time, this is us saying goodbye. Again, remember, no PDFs. Get yourself a copy of Wolf Hustle, and trust me, you will enjoy it. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.